Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man recently seen flying the unfriendly skies around his planet's moon.
Tim Longo. Yes. Oh, man. Space flight to the moon.
Yeah, it was a whole thing.
We have a surprise episode for you all. A little bit out of order. Sometimes we have that happen with our interviews. And I don't think you're going to see this coming because we haven't talked about this at all on purpose. I am very delighted to introduce Michel Ancel to our podcast to talk about Beyond Good and Evil and anywhere else we go in the conversation. To jump into his intro before he jumps in, Michel Ancel is known for working on franchises like Rayman and Rabbids, King Kong, and Beyond Good and Evil, among others. He seems to have dropped out of school. We'll ask him about this at the age of 16 to pursue graphic design for the company Lancour. It looks like then at around age 17, which is crazy, he joined UbiSoft also as a graphic designer, working on the game The Intruder. And then he went on to become lead designer on the original Rayman in 1995, then to direct Rayman 2 in 1999. In 2003, he would create, direct, and write Beyond Good and Evil. And then in 2005, the film adaptation video game King Kong, which was quite awesome too. After that, he would continue with the Rayman franchise, contributing to various games over the years. In 2006, he was honored and knighted by the French Minister of Culture and Communication, along with Miyamoto and Frédéric Raynal. And that was the first time, by the way, that video game developers were given that honor. And then in 2014, he formed his own independent studio called Wild Sheep and continued working with UbiSoft. And then in 2020, among the few to have done this in our medium, he retired and is now apparently spending his time on a wildlife sanctuary. So we are told. So we're really appreciative to have Michel here today to talk about Beyond Good and Evil and just to meet him and to say hello and chat. So welcome, Michel.
Hello.
So one of the ways...
Thank you for this very nice intro. Oh, there is just something I wanted to mention because I'm really proud of one game. I think you didn't mention it because it was my first, I would say, one-man game. Mm-hmm. It was called the Brain Blaster or The Teller in Europe and the Brain Blaster in the US. It was a kind of action puzzle game that I made on first Atari computers, but then on Amiga. And I just mentioned that game because it was the first time I was doing graphics and programming, also animations. And the animation tool I made for this game was the one I used to create Rayman. So it's very interesting because it was like a laboratory for me. You know, this game was a way to learn how to code, do code, as well as art. And also animation. So the first animation tool I made was reused for the first prototypes of a playable version of Rayman on Atari. That's why the Rayman one was also on Atari Jaguar.
Yes.
And the first version was on Super Nintendo. It was a pixel sprite-based, of course, prototypes. But yes, this game was key for me because it was a way to learn many different, I would say, the different jobs and kind of tasks you need to achieve for a video game. So it was the first game I made by myself. It was a painful development, but very, very interesting to understand the complete process of making a game from A to Z.
Amazing. Well, you sort of already started answering the first question, which we usually start with. So thank you for jumping in. And
I try to read in the future. But
yeah, you are exactly. You were a Jedi. We already knew you were a Jedi. Yeah, so our first question usually is just sort of like how it all began for developers because we're so focused on game development on the podcast, and we talk to some of these folks who have been in the industry a long time. It's nice for the audience to hear how you got started. So it sounds like that particular game was definitely worth mentioning. I'm sorry I missed it in the intro, but it's definitely relevant. But even if you want to go back, if you want to go back that far to even before that, or joining Ubisoft in the early days, what drew you to video games in general? That story back in those days, which were all around the same age, so it's similar. You started earlier than us. It was 96 for me, but what drew you to video games? Were you a gamer?
Yeah, I was playing arcade games, and this was the period, the gold age of arcade games. The best games, the more technically advanced game were in the arcade rooms, where you could have big games, and I think the big change, the big things happened with the personal computers, the Atari computers, because I bought them first, I would say, for the art part, but I was not really an artist, but I was really attracted by the idea of creating computer graphics. It was a fascination. I was fascinated by the first short movies from Pixar. The first 3D things you could see made by computers. So yes, I was completely into those things. Like it was like that's a big word, but it was a way. That was the period, the Tron movie, with this idea of just the computer is able to create a world you can go into, and this is something that I imagined with computers. That was something I think I was 12 or 30, and at this period, and I had no computers, but there was a kind of phantasm with computers, where you don't really know what you can do, what are the limits. So I bought a computer, and of course I discovered that it was not as powerful as the one used by Pixar, but it was quite powerful, and it was. So I remember the first things I made with that computer. There was a drawing software for free into the Atari. It was a Neochrome, and first thing I did was drawing something. I remember it was a kind of pirate boat in a big storm. With lightning. So it was a very complex drawing, but I didn't even knew how to save the picture, because the save button was not there was a big load icon, but you couldn't save. To save, you had to press another button to turn this icon into save. It was just very complex. And I just took the computer, I kept it on for hours, but at the end I had to turn it off and lose that first drawing. So I perfectly remember the feeling of I started to create things before even knowing how to use the computer or the software. It was really funny, and from that I didn't stop creating things with the computer, like music, because on the Atari you could have a MIDI keyboard, so it was a way to record, like music. You had like the first synthesizers, like track based music softwares, everything. Back in the past, I remember perceiving the computer as an incredible way of creating anything, like little animations, and that's the way I went into video games, because I made some kind of animations that but it was not. There were no way to play videos, so it was sprite based animation with background or something, using the same techniques as games. But to talk about, it was a kind of animation about the ozone hole menacing the planet, and it was an ecological story. And I presented that to Ubisoft, and that was the beginning of entering the video game world, because then they asked me to present more things, and I had some little prototypes of little games, and so that was the beginning. But the real beginning was about just creating things, not specifically video games, but anything I could do with my computer, the magic computer.
The very powerful magic computer that you bought. Yeah. That is a hilarious story about the save button. Back in the days when we didn't yet know what the interfaces needed to be, swapping the load button for a save button and not knowing that. And so your first digital art lost forever. How sad.
Exactly.
But it makes a good story. That's interesting that this is exactly how these conversations go, because we never know. The first thing you presented to UbiSoft having an ecological theme, which I think might come up later, but it's interesting to hear that that's something that maybe was on your mind even back as a teenager. But getting started, I don't. We've been fortunate enough to have various guests on, so I don't remember the ages of everyone who started in the industry, but I feel like you're one of the youngest to start at age 16, 17. So what was that like? Of course, in those days, video games were still getting going, really. But how did you get connected to UbiSoft even back in the day? What was that? Did you just answer an ad in a paper, or did you know somebody? Or
in fact, they owned a kind of video game magazine that was like given for free, spread for free in some in computer shops, and I don't remember exactly, but and every month you could present your work for kind of to win some prizes. I don't remember exactly the formula, but I just sent my floppy disks to Ubisoft, and someone called me back, but it was absolutely not about this this prize-based thing. It was more to recruit people.
They were recruiting. Yeah. They had a magazine to recruit people. That's amazing.
That's really, I was really surprised. Like, did I win did I win something? Or no, could you come to Paris and then you will meet some developers, and it was not a developer, it was Yves Guillemot himself, the boss of Ubisoft. So it was kind of a big adventure, because I was in south of France, I think I was 15, 16. And then I remember my parents, or maybe I paid by myself, the train to go to Paris. I missed all the subways. I didn't even knew how to go there, so I went into the bad direction. It was awful for me. I was alone in this big city, and I remember exactly. It was a kind of apartment. Ubisoft was a very small company. I think there was almost no developers at this time, but they wanted to create. It was the beginning of the idea of creating developer internal. Expanding and trying to have an internal development studios, but this was the really, really early days. So this is how things began.
Wow, and
that's amazing.
An ad in a magazine, and you thought, I love the idea that they call you up and you're like, "What did I win?" You didn't win anything, but yeah.
Can win a chance at a job.
Yeah, I mean, you did
a career, as it turns out.
So it was way bigger than what I expected. Yes.
Yeah, amazing. So, okay, obviously we want to get to Beyond Good and Evil specifically, but can you, it seems like Rayman was really the kickoff for you, and being, I know you did some of, the earliest essentially artwork and drawings and character design for Rayman and such. And as Brett said, he's a big fan, so I'm sure that you two could talk about that more. But yeah, what was the genesis of Rayman, and how did they did they ask you for concepts, or did they have a concept, or what was this? You said it was early and they were just getting going, so I'm sure that their processes were still being formed, and it was probably
Yeah,
just a lot of brainstorming.
in fact, I went into the company and the job, but the job was kind of serious. It was about some developments, internal developments on Super Nintendo, because it was the beginning of the Super Nintendo. But nothing really happened there, and I wanted to, because my main motivation was really about making games, and because my job was very more on the art side, where I was more interested in making games as a whole, so I had made that little game by myself as an external developer. This was the first contract with UbiSoft, so the teller or the brand blaster. So I made that game, and then they hired me internally for internal things, but nothing really happened there. And I continued at home creating things, and Rayman was one of those things. So I used my tools and the things I had developed on the Atari computer to make this first playable version of Rayman. And it was quite amazing, because the character was very the animation system and everything was quite new. So I really started with the character as a personal work, and then I developed the world around. And there's some pictures. I've seen some pictures into the internet of. So it's not as well drawn as the final one, but it's interesting because you see the essential elements, the key elements of the Rayman's world. It's very colorful, quite positive, funny characters. So I started alone, but and then one programmer arrived, and then UbiSoft started to really develop the internal studio, and they needed one game to develop, the team and go into that process of making a big internal team. So I moved from external development to internal development, but with the same project. So the contract and everything changed, but the game was the same. But I have to really say that it was not a game made by one person, because I started everything, I could say, but every person on the project, incredible programmers, artists, animators, and of course sound and music composer, all these people made the project a reality and made it as good as it was at the end. I think I started alone, but I think at the end with the QA, we were almost 100%, because they were like PlayStation, Jaguar,
Wow.
at the same time. So it was a big development. It was like a all in for Ubisoft. Like they started
that's
with
a lot
one
of
game.
people at that time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
wow.
it's one person. It's Michel Guillemot, the brother of Yves Guillemot.
Mm-hmm.
Yves Guillemot's brother. He was a developer, and he was a very nice person. And he realized that if you want to develop both on PlayStation, all the different consoles at the same time, PC and everything, you need the right people, you need a solid team, solid tools. So he developed the overall organization around Rayman, and I think it was really all in. I was like, wow, those people, they put all this money on that game, and it was a real they really tried something. They believed in the game also. It was difficult because it was the beginning of 3D games, like the first polygons were arriving with the PlayStation 1, and people, they were a bit lost into the situation. Do we continue 2D? Do we develop 3D? It's a completely new technology. So it was hard times, but they continued making a 2D game. So and that's how, and that's something I really admire. I really have I'm impressed with this decision, because they did not consult the game, even if it was a bit like an old-fashioned game, compared to the big 3D things coming on the PlayStation 1. But they kept on believing, and we just finished the game, and it was a success. So now looking back at those people, Michel Guillemot, Yves Guillemot, I'm impressed by how they managed the situation.
Yeah, that's a really big risk to take at that time, because if it had not made it, it would have that probably would have been it, right? There would have been no UbiSoft today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a key point into the
an inflection. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Brett, do you have? I mean, you've always lauded the Rayman games. You're a fan. You've talked about their. I mean, Michel mentioned a couple things about the world and the positivity and the character design and just how unique of a franchise it is. And Rayman himself is such an iconic character design. I think everyone can recognize that character no matter what, because it's so unique. He's so unique. Do you have any? Because I am not, unfortunately,
a
Rayman player.
You're not a Rayman guy. Yeah,
so,
I mean, for me, the big things that do come through are the positivity is an excellent term. I wouldn't have thought of it, but there's always like this friendship. I started with Rayman 2, as I think I mentioned, but so you've got Globox, I think is his name, and all these little things you're trying to rescue. It has a very like Sonic feel in terms of what you're doing, but it's way more positive than Sonic. Sonic is very dire. It's interesting that you went from sort of ecological disaster to this kind of more positive, bright Rayman. Maybe there's some similar themes in there, but I'm I'm forever be a Rayman fan. So
thank you.
So where do we go to get to Beyond Good and Evil? I know that we're going to skip some years to do that. And of course, we're here to talk about Beyond Good and Evil, and we only have an hour with you.
I'm actually curious how you get from Rayman, to a different sort of world, with more human characters. You've got the animal characters who are humanoid, adaptations of animals. How do you get there? Do you start with character? Do you start with your kind of plot? How did you get to that?
On the I would say if you look at the timeline of the games, Rayman 2 came after Rayman 1, of course, and it was a bit more mature. We wanted to have a more adventure feel in Rayman 2. So with introducing characters that are humanoid characters, like Lee, the fairy, and some characters like that, a bit more mature. So it was a step from Rayman 1 to Beyond Good and Evil. Rayman 2 is a real step, with the different cinematics, and the team is the same also on the technical side, because it was a very interesting team. We developed our own cinematic tools, their own engine, animation tools. Everything was designed internally, and that's the same team who worked on the big tools behind Beyond Good and Evil 1, the first, I would say, semi-open world adventure kind of game. It was really big for us. A new console, the PlayStation 2, and a new world. But the main idea was really around the main character, Jade, a journalist. This was the main idea, playing a female character, which is not too archetypal. Yes, archetypal. Yep. And that's the thank you. That's the main thing who drove the scenario, the gameplay, and everything. So if I believed that the character would lead the project better than me, writing tons of things, like working on the character. Things that didn't really happen that way, because I think it's important to mention it. But yes, at the beginning, it was really Jade, the character, and then I worked on all the different characters around Jade, like Paige the pig, and that we had a third one who didn't continue in the final story. But it was the idea of one character with nice secondary characters around, into this post-apocalyptical world attacked by aliens that are not really aliens at the end, but it's a bit complex. But yes, the big story, it was a story-driven game, really. So, which I think, looking back, was a bit disturbing for the many people, because when you are used to platform games or, I don't know, FPS or whatever, you start with gameplay and eventually you add a story onto it.
Right.
And, it was a period where you had adventure games that were like point and clicks, or I think the better example at this time was Zelda, because it was a mix of action game and adventure game, very well balanced with, of course, puzzles and everything, story puzzles and some action, little fighting sequences and RPG components. And so it was a very nice example, but it was, I would say, the most complex game you could work on, because you mix everything. And it's not just a FPS or a platform game where you put a story. It's a real story-based game where you mix gameplay and story to create something. It's not just gameplay-based, not just story-based. Everything try to work together to create a nice experience. And it was, I have to say, looking back at this period, it was difficult for me, a big challenge. And once again, because of the people who worked on the project, it was made possible. By myself, I would have a lot of difficulties, but some people I could mention later were really key in finding the right solutions to finish that game that was really, really ambitious.
Yeah, I mean, we talked. So, the structure of the podcast, we play the game week by week with the audience, right? Kind of like a book club. And so it allows us to go pretty deep into the games because we're playing them over the course of a month or more. And we talked about it on I think we had 4 episodes for this series. And on every episode, we talked about how, especially for the era, because we were actually in development ourselves at the same time at LucasArts, and we talked about, how complex and how sort of genre bending or merging the game is, because on the podcast, we often talk a lot about the genre that the game is in that we're playing at the time, because a lot of the games that we play are usually ones that either define the genre or, really like distilled the genre into, its form. And Beyond Good and Evil, like you said, is such a interesting, quite magical mixture of a lot of different things. We obviously brought up Zelda, so it's good that you brought it up too, because we were going to ask about that anyway. But I believe we did also bring up graphic adventures, and cinematic. I mean, there's some amazing camera work in the cinematic moments. And we have probably some questions about the camera for you too, from a development standpoint. But it's good to hear that you see how complex it was too, because every time a new sort of like experience happens in that game, you're kind of in awe of like, wait, I'm going to fly a ship now. Wait, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And really kudos to everybody, you and everybody working on it. But it's kind of, from a developer standpoint, it's good to hear you say, though I'm sure it was hard on everybody to go through a difficult project, it's good to hear you admit that it was difficult, because it looked like it was difficult.
Yeah, it was very, very difficult. Just to give you a little idea, when we started the project, we really had a whole planet with this idea of going from around the planet. We had a prototype, but we were really not able to use that space and make it relevant and really interesting. So we took the big decision of changing that. But we had like night and day cycles, and it was very complex. And you could turn around. It was flat, and we were simulating the fact that it was a real planet. But so it was not a real planet, even on the technical side. But on the feeling you could have, you could like go in front and turn around the planet and have that feeling. So yeah, it was even more complex than the final one. And I think at some point the big decision again what do we cut, what do we keep, how do you manage from this huge ambitious vision to something you can really finish as and keep the main experience dense and interesting, of course. So at some point it's super key and important to remember those moments where you are in a room and you say, okay, we have to cut things and we have to understand as a team and not just me as a tyrannic person or whatever, because you know that you need everyone on your, on the project, on the deck of this big ship, if you want to reach a destination, because at some point we are really in the blue ocean, and we needed to, to use the team and talented people to, find the right direction and something we could all together finish as a team. So yes, it was complex.
Yeah, I mean, great. This is going to sound cheesy, but I think the three of us for sure know that great games are made from important decisions, especially with cutting things, what not to do, choosing what to do and what not to do. And I guess I'm not too surprised to hear that you had initial ambition for a whole planet. But I think that the focus that the game ended up, for me at least as a player, felt like a good chunk, right? It felt like a good, still open world-ish, and it felt like it had a beginning, middle, and end and everything. So those cut decisions, having Brett and I been a part of many of those in our past, are critical and hard, very hard. But when you look back, if you were able to make them at the right times, they end up being very defining moments, like you said. So you mentioned Zelda, and you mentioned an ambitious vision, and then we talked about Rayman and the step of Rayman 2 before getting to Beyond Good and Evil. But what other influences, like where was the concept of a planet or an open world? We often guess at other games that have been coming out around the time that might have influenced people's visions for games. But do you remember any other, or was it primarily Zelda?
Oh, I think the space games like Elite or I don't remember. Yes, or Star Glider 2, or those games from Argonaut. This game from Argonaut. Who were the guys who worked later on Star Fox? It was again the big thing I talked about earlier, about the magic you could get from a computer, like those 3D world you could enter into, like in Tron the movie. I think that's exactly the same thing. It's this idea of okay, I can create a world. I'm going to dive into this world. I will discover planets and things like that. And yes, this was driving. I had those. I remember on my Atari playing those 2D games with wireframe 3D graphics. But then what you can imagine from that is just huge. And I wanted to live this again, into my own game, this feeling that you can travel and discover, talk with, aliens or discover things. And this idea that you don't really know what are the boundaries of the world you're into. It's not just on the physical side, but also on the kind of gameplay you can have vehicles or characters you can meet and things you can do. I like this idea that it's a bit blurry and you have a game, but you don't exactly know how far you're going to go. With the different gameplays and the experience you will live. It was I like this idea of keeping this mysterious, and I think at some point it's things that are, which is my own, of course, idea, but I think this is also driving games like Metal Gear Solid, or some games from Hideo Kojima or Mr. Miyamoto, sorry, because at some point, when it's interesting as a player, you have the feeling when you play some games that you have almost understood the main gameplays and things that are going to happen. And it's very interesting to go back in the era where you were just a kid and you are not too technical and maybe not able to really understand the boundaries of the game, and the fact that at some point you have seen everything and now it's just about finishing things or repeating the same task over and over. It's just more difficult. So I really love this idea that some games are going to surprise you, like same incredible moment when you have the horse in Ocarina of Time, where it's completely changing the perception of the game. But of course, you could because it was into the introduction, you knew you would play this animal, the horse. But all these kind of ideas that you're going to maybe dive into lakes or whatever, but you don't exactly know what is going to be the next power, the next thing, the next world, and this mystery around the game and this feeling of living into a kind of dream or something like that is really something that drove me and into the directions with Beyond Good and Evil.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that now. And when we were playing, that was really, I had played it before back when it came out, and Tim had not, or had not played very much. So there was a point at which he's like, well, I think I'm basically done, because today, most games are more like what you described of, you pretty much, it's the repeatable fun. You play the same thing kind of over and over, and there are variations, obviously, and difficulty, etc. But back then, to imagine something this big on a PlayStation 2, like I wouldn't have. I mean, most of the games I worked on were the repeatable fun. Try to find some new things you can do with it, and not the big Zelda swings. I wonder how. Like, can you remember things that were those kind of big moments that you had to leave behind that were hard to get the team on board with? What were the big things that people really wanted to keep that you just couldn't to ship?
You mean things that
you cut? Yeah.
I think first thing was the kind of open world and many cities thing. So this, and even the size of the city.
Yeah,
I think we were, but it was not too difficult to cut. I think at some point, because we are doing a lot of updates with the team, we didn't worked too much on things that were not in the final game. I think the team was about 35 people with everybody like porting the game, making the tools, artists.
Wow.
It was like 35 people or no more. And it's just crazy just hearing that.
That's crazy.
That is insane. Yeah.
Yeah, like that's crazy. You can't imagine the amount of tools. Imagine that the whole 3D was done into the tool. Even the modeling, skinning, animation, everything was done into the main tool. Like the tool we had, we didn't use the 3ds Max or 3D Studio or whatever. Everything was.
Oh my gosh! Are you serious?
Yeah, I think it would be crazy to do something to make those tools, make something presenting those tools, because I have not seen even tools from today. I have not seen tools where you could do everything from scratch into the same tool. So UV mapping, animations, cinematics, everything was done into the main tool.
And just a team of 35 people. That's
crazy. And the tool was incredible. It was stable. It was optimized. The coding, of course, was done. All the script was done all the coding was done into the engine with a dynamic coding system that was compiled in C for the cooking, for the optimization on the PlayStation. But it was you could make your game from scratch, write everything. Without any external tool, even for the code, for the modeling, animation, everything. The morphing for the faces, all the multimorph things, blend shapes for the faces, everything. It was and sorry, I'm back. Yeah, the tool was incredible. As an example, you could change the ground in real time and have the collision modified, and the collision of the character was computed while you were playing. So it's just crazy because the tool was also running. You could modify things on the fly while you were just playing. So it was really powerful, and we used the same kind of powerful tools for Rayman Origin and Rayman Legends. Tools where
really?
you do everything into the engine.
But it's not the same tool.
It's not the same, but it's the same
the same approach.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Because it was so powerful for the team, for a small team, being able, to make everything like that was really
makes you very agile.
Yeah. It was incredible.
Yeah. I was saying when you stepped away, I was saying to Brett that this might be the biggest revelation of this interview. I didn't, we wanted to obviously talk about themes and the character and the world and all of that, but would have had no idea that the game's engine was built that way and the tools were all within the engine. That's
and
astounding.
I think it will be wonderful. It will be wonderful to even why not release those tools, because you could really make whatever you want, prototypes of anything. There is a small game at the end if you have all the pearls, collect pearls during the game, and I made a small mini game that you can play if you complete the game 100%. And I made it by myself, using the scripting tool and all the modeling and all the art, everything. So it's really interesting to see how easy it was to create any kind of games, with that tool. Yeah, very.
That was the air hockey. Was that the air hockey game?
No. He says if you get all the pearls, Tim, there's a mini game that you unlock.
Yeah, your pearl.
No.
Yeah.
Oh no. Well, I wanted to go back quickly and just kind of share my own delight in your point about like games, that your goal to have games still surprise people and the unexpected. And to Brett's point, I hadn't finished it back when it had come out, and so this was my first time. And Paige kept talking about the spaceship and and all this kind of stuff, and I kind of roughly knew that there was the end was kind of a big deal. But to your point, like, I assumed that the spaceship was going to be in a cutscene or some other thing. It's like, oh, they're going to get us to the moon somehow. But when, to your point about delighting and surprising the player, even me, who I'm not a child, but I am childlike, and I'm a developer, and so it's like, yeah, I can't see them putting me in a spaceship. That's not going to happen, right? And then when it does, to your point, and I think this game does time and time again, surprise you, I could not believe it. And then you're flying over the city and, shooting and combat, and then you fly up to the moon, and there was a great, clever transition to get to that other level load. And then you're flying and fighting on the moon in a ship, and then you land. It's just an and then. And so, and in this era, again, being a developer at the time, pretty astounding combination of experiences. And you definitely surprised me, even last month. So kudos to you and the team for that.
Nice. That was the goal.
So, I wanted to pull a little bit on the thread. You mentioned Jade herself and the character, and just, I think, characters and world design in general, because it's such one other theme that we talked a lot about when we played was just how unique of a world it was and how unique the characters are, especially all of the, anthropomorphized animal characters. And Paige is, I don't know, I maybe I'm being hyperbolic, but I think Paige is going to be one of the most memorable video game characters of all time. So what was your process there? I mean, was it just iteration and brainstorming? Like, it's just such a different, unique world to live in.
Yeah, again, I think the main idea was really to focus on the characters. And the person responsible for the story Jacques Exertier. He was coming from the motion picture industry. He was making big motion picture movies and things like that. He worked as an lead animator. So he was not into the video game thing. It was really like about telling story, creating emotion. So it's fair. It's not about me making a game by myself. It's really about being a team with this kind of very talented person who's able to, do the bridge between pure gameplay and pure storytelling, and someone intelligent enough to understand what is gameplay, what is the medium, how are we going to what kind of story are we going to tell, and as you mentioned, the camera system, dialogues while you play, all these things were, I would say, cinematic tools that you can have interactively into the game, and they are not cutting the game experience too much. No, it's not just about non-playable sequence. It's also about how can you tell the story while you play, and that was really something we wanted to go into deeply. And all of the demos, all the prototypes we made were about this. How can we tell the story while we play and with the gameplay? So I think once it's your main goal and it's really clear, okay, it's story-based, it's about one very specific character into this specific world. So everything is turning around this idea. So it's helping a lot, taking the decisions, because, and I think I have to mention it, but there are some parts of the game that to me are too gamey, especially the stealth sequences, in this kind of red factory. It's a bit too long for me. It's a bit too much. It's like a filler, it's like repeating things, and it's a bit too much, but it's not, it's okay. Let's say it's okay. But it's the only time into the game where we don't really balance well story, the experience, of telling a story. But what I'm proud of is that this mistake, I would say, happened in this kind of levels, but it's like, let's say 10%, 5% of the game. But I like the overall rhythm, the way you move from story, storytelling, receiving mails, looking at CD-ROMs and things like that, with informations. So every way to tell the story with interactive sequences, and that's something that helps us a lot. Like, it's story driven. We have strong characters, so everything is going to be about those characters. So you have the main energy of everybody is focusing on this, and you repeat that during the big meetings. Okay, we are doing a story driven kind of action game, and we have to keep that in mind. And this is like the important way of managing, the development. You have one main idea, and you have to keep it. Otherwise, you have a kind of strange polymorphic result with a bit of everything, but not a real focus. So that helps us a lot. And again, Jacques, the writer, but also directing animations and things like that, he really helped me a lot, and he was key, like in the success of making that game.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you for mentioning him, and keep coming back to the team. It's a team effort, and Brett and I both agree about that in development. It always is such a group effort. But yeah, to your point, you do still need that strong vision and focus for the team. And even though it's hard, I think, to find the correlations with this game and others, because there is so much going on, and Zelda does come up. I think, to your point, one key differentiator and thing that I think makes the game so magical is that it is such a story-focused game. And we did talk about that as well on the series, that it's very curated, and most of the game is very bespoke and pushes Jade through the story And I think that's where the camera work comes in. I remember some really amazing camera shots that even just through the level design. And sometimes, the cameras, we struggled with the camera sometimes because I think, to your point, for me at least, because you're trying to tell the story and have the gameplay together, those are, and you're changing, the level design is changing constantly too as you're going from place to place. Sometimes those struggle to work together well, but most of the time there were these great moments. I can remember one in particular where you're sneaking through, I think, like a vent behind some guards, and the camera actually is outside of the vent, watching you go through, and the guards are actually in the foreground of the shot. So the camera's in front of them, watching you go behind them in this vent. It's just like really stuff that you wouldn't normally get from something like Zelda, because it's not so driven by, that moment to moment thrust of the character story. So it's very unique in that way.
Yeah, I think we had 2 or 3 really nice level designers, and they loved, movies and cinema. Some of them studied cinema, so they were really happy to be able to use specific camera angle to, bring a different point of view on the action and the tension, and bring the tension and everything. So yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, at the beginning, the game was absolutely camera driven, a bit like first Resident Evil. It was like camera angles, and you couldn't modify the camera. Oh, I think Metal Gear Solid 2 was a bit like that too. With camera you couldn't really interact with. Yes, I think Metal Gear Solid 2 was like that, but we modified that to give so it's a mix between a camera you can really move and something that is sometimes that is driven by the developers.
Yeah, it's a challenge to mix them that way too. So to have the ability to go back and forth is tricky. We talked about, ironically, I think we talked about Resident Evil as well, as wondering if there was any sort of, lessons or inspirations from that. But I was going to ask about level design because we did talk about that a lot too. That's my background before getting into creative direction. And so I'm always paying close attention to it. And I think a lot of the level design is really inspired and really unique and special for this game. So I'm glad to hear that they had a cinematic bent, and thought about it that way, because it definitely showed. Yeah.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, that's true. And again, because I think at some point, even if we had a big, I would say, first process, very conception phase that was open to many things, we ended up with a formula that we could explain to everybody. Just as a small side story, it helped a lot for King Kong, because we used a lot those techniques, mixing cinematics. We used the same tool, so everything was created into the engine again for that game. But
so it did have it did live on. It got to see another game. That one was a little hard to track down. I didn't realize that the Jade engine got used again.
Yeah. It was an extension of the same engine.
Oh, okay.
But it was the same team, same people. They were so happy to work together again, even if it was a different game. And we would have preferred the sequel of Beyond Good and Evil, but it was not possible at this time. So, but yes, it's to go back into the subject. Yes, it's interesting to at some point have a clear brief for the level designers, where you can really say what they can do or not, and what is the global purpose. And I think at some point they are in the middle of everybody, because they have to mix everything to create the final experience. So it's the key team, because they are like the one who mix everything together to create the magic. So it's very important to focus on those guys.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I always say that, I said that even back at this time that, the designers, the level designers especially, are sort of the last people to touch the game. And if you're not keeping them happy and giving them the things that they need, you could have the best tech, the best art, the best everything, and then have the game fall apart because they couldn't put it together into something fun. It's really, really, really important to focus on them. They've always been my... That's why Tim and I are still together doing a podcast now, whatever, 26 years later.
Yeah, we've been level designer and programmer on many things at this point.
Yeah, for sure.
Wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, you've probably been asked this before, and I've probably missed it in interviews and such, but I have to ask about the title. And you alluded to a little bit as far as the DOMs, and are they aliens or what happened at the end? But is Beyond Good and Evil inspired by the book, or is it just a cool name, or is it alluding to sort of like the sort of macro story that is alluded to at the end of the game? Can you enlighten us a little bit about that? Or
yeah, of course. Yeah. Yes, the main idea is that things are quite blurry because when you worked on Rayman games, it's more black and white. The good guys, the bad guys. I was interested into the idea of playing a journalist that is trying to dive into the secrets, revealing things, and so the main idea is really about if you start investigating, you understand things deeper, and you don't stop with just this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, and you will discover something that's a bit more complex. So that's the global idea, of investigating and discovering some informations. And but Jade herself, she's involved in the gray, the thing. She's between. In finally, the first name was Between Good and Evil. It was not Beyond, because she was between the two forces. Like she's from the the bad side. She was a kind of fighter for the bad guys, but she lost memories and she'd been rescued by Paige, and he helped her, going through the trauma of what she did when she was younger. So there was an idea of a character that discovered her own past, being more like I am between the two main forces that seems to be good or evil. So that was the main idea from the beginning. And but when we simplified the story and everything, we didn't took a lot of time, and we didn't put a lot of energy into explaining too much things. So you understand while playing that she's somehow connected, and she has to go back on what we could call the dark side. Mm-hmm. They want to, she's got another name, and she's coming from those. She's connected to the bad guys, or to those not really the bad guys at the end. In fact, they're not the let's say the guys that are healed, and you see sometimes the alpha section, the real guy, you discover that they have genetic deformations, and so those guys, they are not in a good shape. I don't remember but there are some close up where you see that they have disease and things like that. So it's really about those people trying to save themselves or survive. So it's that's the main idea about the story, is this idea that some people are surviving, and they are doing some bad things for that, but they've got a reason, or if it's not a reason, it's why they are doing this. There is at some point that is the situation is a consequence of something that is maybe not their will, not something they wanted, but they have to survive now, and because they are surviving, they take the energy out of the others to repair themselves. So that's why they're capturing people, taking the energy, and trying to repair their modified or mutant cells and things like that. So it's kind of basic things or situation. But it was interesting after Rayman, which is really white and really black, interesting to have something that's a bit more gray, where you start discussing about the fact that sometimes people, to survive, they are doing things that are really not very good, but maybe this didn't happen. It's not their fault, but now they have to survive. So yes, that's the main idea. But during the game, we didn't went too far into this idea, but we started to put that in place because the idea was to make like 2 or 3 games to go deeper than into the story. That's why.
Yeah, I mean, it shows. Again, the reason I brought it up is because we talked about it, and I think that, like, again, I don't want to keep comparing it to Zelda, but Zelda landing more in sort of myth and legend as far as its story and character motivations go, and this, it's nice to hear you talk so deeply about the themes, and because it is a game with a lot of heart, and there are themes in there, and that gray area does come through even in its sort of basic form, and it's kind of refreshing to have something that is dealing with different themes like that, especially at this time, because a lot of games definitely didn't do that. And there's that moment after the lighthouse is destroyed that the dog comes. She just sits down, and the dog comes over and kind of, consoles her. Yeah. And there's just it was kind of an unexpected moment for me, because I'm like, wow, this game goes places. And it is gray. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, and then shortly after you get a spaceship. So it's like, yeah, it's quite something. So yeah, kudos to everybody. It's an amazing game.
Yeah, this sequence was really interesting because it was developed during the last part of it was made during the last development part. So it was a time where we knew exactly what would be the ending and everything. So working on this dedicated specific sequence to emphasis on the fact that Jade could feel guilty, because everything is destroyed because of her doing things, investigating, so that's another theme about that is gray, because you have a situation where you have those kind of invaders. You can be on their side, you can try to be neutral, or you can try to fight against them. But if you fight against them because you want to be good, maybe it will have very bad consequences for the people close to you. And at some point, you can question yourself about, why am I doing this? Do I want to be a hero? Do I really want to save the world? But by wanting to save the world, I'm destroying part of it, because now people want to revenge or whatever, So those questions, are the in-between questions, where you can question yourself, into the real world. Imagine, of course, it's really... it's bad, and it's a complex subject, but you could imagine that what would I do into such a situation where you have people invading your country, taking control of things? Where do you place your action? What do you do? Are you against? Are you neutral? And I think it's a mix of everything, depending on the context and everything. So it was for us was a very important sequence. Yeah, because a way to start telling deeper things and go deeper into the fact that the character himself, that Jade, start to have doubts about everything, it was quite interesting.
Yeah, it's relatable to your point, right? People will take away something from that and think about how it applies, and that's one of the wonderful things about, in my opinion, in our opinion, I think, about video games, is that you're playing as Jade. You're putting yourself into this more than you might in a film or other medium, because it's interactive, and I think the impact can be quite large.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming on. We're just delightful conversation. We don't want to take up too much more of your time, Michel, but thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's really gone some places I didn't expect, and we've learned some things that we definitely didn't know. So this has been really a revelation.
Wonderful.
So thank you so much.
Thank you too. Bye bye.
Harry King on the killers to and the Kiriama Hudson the Sidorba in the car get the north get the stone lava the Rakiama I hate all the gamers propaganda just to be me propaganda just to be me propaganda just to be me propaganda just to hit.
Welcome back from the break. That was quite a conversation that has taken us beyond good and evil into an entire engine that you did everything in, which was an unexpected bonus revelation as part of the conversation. What a amazing development time that was.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. Yeah, I mean that is just like an astonishing thing to find out for me. I don't know why, but
no, I mean that's it's early Unreal sort of had that, and they still kind of nod at it. Like they still have things that they do that they can do an engine that you usually wouldn't. But
you're not modeling
everything, modeling. Yeah. I mean, wow. And blend weights and just everything being in the thing.
Audio tracks,
remarkable.
Yeah, it's cool. But the connection point I was going to bring up, which obviously that it isn't the same thing, but for better or for worse, Ubisoft still very much commits to internal tech.
Yeah,
and it's not even like they use one engine; they actually have a couple, 3, I think, that they use for their different franchises. Yeah, like Assassins and Far Cry are different ones. And, so it's just kind of like interesting.
Plus, they had the one that they were using for, as he mentioned, Origins and Legends, which was also used for things like Valiant Hearts and one other game, I think. So it's like they've always had that going, and it it speaks to their history where they went all in on Rayman at the very beginning.
That was a great story there. I hadn't realized that Rayman was their first game, and I don't know.
I don't think it was their first game, but it was one where they used it because his prior game that he mentioned, the Brain Blasters, or the Teller as it was called in Europe, that was also published by Ubisoft. But that's when they were like, how are we going to step up? Like
they need a mascot. They need a mascot.
Yeah, they
game
need to become we want to be as big as other publishers in the world or other developers in the world. And how are they going to do that? And doing games on 3 very different platforms at the time. The Jaguar and the Sega Saturn, I think it was, and the PlayStation. Like, that's wild. It's like, and one of those didn't do too well as well. Actually the Saturn, I'm not sure how well the Saturn did, but the Jaguar was just like a non-entity. At least here in the United States. I don't know if that was true in Europe.
Yeah, it didn't do well. I remember.
I
remember going to the store to see it.
But fantastic conversation.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he referenced the team so much as well.
Yeah, and I was hoping that he would get into some of the thematic stuff, and especially got that at the end there, because I had, I think we both had a feeling that there was some thoughtfulness put into all of it, because it is a very special game, and I think the way he spoke about it really reflected that too, why it is what it is. So it's a good capper, I think, on that game, and it makes me want to play Rayman now. I will say,
I'm telling you, there's some good games. We could together try Rayman Legends and Origins. I could be the adult who's played it before, and you could be the child. That's a little pre-show talk we had about Rayman because I am a fan, and have played a relatively good number of them, because I think I even played some Hoodlum Havoc, which was Rayman 3, but have not played a lot of Rabbids games. Just the first one with the Wii. Kids did enjoy that one a lot too, but. but it is really for adults and kids, and mostly kids, to play together. It's a great conversation, and he's very thoughtful about the development process and sort of infusing everything holistically about the themes, into everything in the game, and and talking about you could really hear him kind of laying out the pillars, of different aspects of the game as we talked.
Yep. Yeah, and it's a really holistic game for a lot of that, and you can see now why. And it's interesting to hear. I definitely didn't want to get into Beyond Good and Evil 2 for
for obvious reasons.
But it's interesting to see some of the early thoughts and vision for the first game, and then seeing where 2 is trying to get to, or may never get to. Who knows? But fingers crossed. It was good. It was a good time. Good interview.
Yeah, great to talk to him. We're so blessed to have these. If you had told me back then that 20 something years later, I'd be talking with the creative director on a format that didn't exist, the podcast, I would have said, well, huh? It would have been too intelligible, but it's really, really cool that we get to do that.
And I should shout out to thanks to colleague Fred Marcus for connection to Michel.
Oh, cool.
So he was the one that got us
connected.
Yep.
That's awesome. All right. Well, you can shoot us email. We don't typically read them on the interview cast. This one's going to run a little later than we're recording it as well, so it kind of be weird. But you can shoot those to devgameclub@gmail.com. We also love to see your reviews online. I get all the Apple ones. If you put it into something else, then please just let us know where to find it, or even just send us an email to let us know. We like to read those on the air. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com, on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at devgameclub. And you can also find my co-host occasionally twitching at
twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
We have a fan-run Discord. I'm not going to talk about your game because who knows what you'll be playing by the time this comes out.
Agreed.
We also have a fan-run Discord that you can find a link for in the show notes. Good place to hang out and chat about things, about games, about the industry, about what we're talking about here, and then whatever else they care to talk about. It's a fun place. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, our merch store, that Discord, lots of things. All the things are by Mark Garcia, with some help from others. Have fun converting your ship to a plane and your plane to a spacecraft this week, and good night.
Good night.